Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are exploring four historical events that sound, well, completely made up. But I promise you, they are 100% true. You know, history has this funny way of totally outwriting fiction, and today, we're going to look at some absolutely jaw-dropping examples of reality just defying all of our expectations.
Okay, to kick things off, let me ask you a question. If you were in a massive, catastrophic shipwreck, what is the best possible way to survive? Would you strap on a life vest, sprint for the nearest emergency boat, or maybe just stay as alert and sober as humanly possible?
Well, the answer, unbelievably, is to simply sleep right through the whole thing. I know, there is no way that sounds real, but we're going to break down exactly how that happened a bit later. First, though, we need to travel over to the South Island of New Zealand to talk about a very different kind of nightmare.
Number 1. The bloodthirsty sheep-eating parrots.
So, I want you to completely forget about that cute, colorful little pirate parrot you're probably picturing sitting on a sailor's shoulder. Instead, meet the highly intelligent, flesh-eating Kia parrot of New Zealand. Now, there are over 400 species of parrots out there, and almost all of them are strict herbivores. But the Kia, they're an opportunistic, carnivorous exception with a taste for something much, much larger than a cracker.
Picture this. It's the 1860s, and sheep farmers in New Zealand are waking up horrified to find their livestock violently ripped open in the night. The lower parts of the sheep's backs were just torn apart, with vital fat deposits completely exposed. The sheep were dying from the severe trauma and the infections that followed. Naturally, at first, everyone logically assumed this had to be some terrifying new disease spreading through the herds. Because honestly, who on earth would ever suspect a parrot?
Now, what is truly staggering about this whole ordeal is the sheer amount of time it took, literally over a century, for the scientific community to actually believe the farmers over their own assumptions. Back in 1868, a farmer named James McDonald stayed up all night and watched a Kia attack a sheep with his own eyes. But jump ahead to 1962, and animal specialists were still dismissing the claims. They just assumed the birds were scavenging sheep that were already dead. It wasn't until August of 1992 that the first video evidence captured Kia actively hunting healthy sheep. They finally proved the farmers right, a whopping 130 years later.
It's honestly a prime example of how intellectual arrogance can completely blind us to the truth. Because scientists dismissed the farmers as liars, the Kia was heavily protected by law. This left the farmers entirely helpless against a highly intelligent bird that had basically learned how to exploit their most vulnerable livestock.
All right, moving right along. Number 2, Viking marketing and misnomers.
If you have ever scratched your head over that classic geographic riddle, why Iceland is green and Greenland is icy, the answer is actually pretty simple. Iceland was a literal description of the weather, while Greenland was just, brilliant spin doctoring. The Vikings had a very straightforward naming structure based on exactly what they saw. Iceland was likely discovered in the wintertime when it was blanketed in snow. Greenland, on the other hand, that was purely a strategic branding choice, born out of pure necessity.
Enter Eric the Red. Now, this guy had a bit of a habit of getting exiled for manslaughter, and he desperately needed to convince people to leave flourishing Iceland for an uncharted territory. After being kicked out of Norway, and then subsequently exiled from Iceland in 982 AD, Eric had literally nowhere to go. So he set his sights on establishing a brand new colony on this harsh, uncharted island to the west.
And he actually knew exactly what he was doing. Eric explicitly noted that people are naturally attracted to favorable names. He knew Iceland sounded harsh and uninviting, but Greenland, that sounded like lush opportunity. And it worked like a charm, cementing one of history's absolute greatest real estate scams. After returning to Iceland in 985 AD and selling this beautiful lie, 25 ships followed him. 14 of those ships survived the brutal journey and went on to establish a highly successful colony.
Up next, number 3, Trial of a Dead Pope.
Okay, buckle up for this one. Let's dive into the Cadaver Synod, a moment in history that truly sounds like a bad fever dream. The year is 897 AD, and the new pope, Stephen VI, decides to place the 9-month-old visibly decomposing corpse of his predecessor, Pope Formosus, on trial.
So here's the setup. The chaos started because Pope Formosus was playing this incredibly dangerous game of political flip-flopping in Rome, which deeply, deeply angered the Spoleto faction right before he naturally died. You see, the 800s were marked by massive political instability. Formosus originally backed the Spoleto faction, but 3 years later, he completely backstabbed them and invited a rival faction to invade Italy.
When Formosus died, the pro-Spoleto Pope Stephen VI took power, and he wanted absolute, uncompromising revenge.
And it is just a horrific, totally clinical display of the lengths Pope Stephen went to in order to permanently erase his rival's legacy. They actually dug up the rotting body, put it on trial in a cathedral, found it guilty, stripped it naked, chopped off its 3 blessing fingers, and dragged it through the streets before just tossing it into the Tiber River. It was this gruesome, over-the-top theatrical display of power and spite.
But you know what? The whole brutal stunt totally backfired. It turns out that even in the incredibly chaotic 800s, people found the public humiliation of a dead pope absolutely repulsive. Instead of intimidating his rivals, Pope Stephen just incited massive riots all across Rome. He was quickly stripped of his power, thrown into jail, and died shortly after. This left future popes to quietly fish Formosus out of the river and reinstate his legacy.
All right, bringing us to our final story, number 4, the miracle shipwreck survivor.
Picture this. It's July 26, 1956. A luxury ocean liner called the SS Andrea Doria is navigating through heavy fog, carrying 1,700 passengers who were all comfortably asleep. Among them was 14-year-old Linda Morgan. She was resting in her first-class cabin with her family, completely oblivious to the disaster that was rushing toward them in the dark.
Then suddenly, out of nowhere, another ship, the MS Stockholm, T-bones the Andrea Doria. It penetrated 40 meters, which is incredibly deep, right into the cabins where families were sleeping. The Swedish ship pierced the luxury liner with this devastating force, completely destroying the entire section of the ship it struck.
And directly in the zone of impact, that 14-year-old girl named Linda Morgan. She was sleeping in the bed closest to the outside of the ship, directly in the path of that oncoming bow.
Now, tragically, 46 people did lose their lives that night. But somehow, the mangled physics of this crash transported Linda safely from her bed directly onto the bow of the ship that hit them. The impact instantly killed her 8-year-old stepsister and her stepfather. But the gnarled, twisting metal inexplicably scooped Linda and her mattress right out of the sinking Andrea Doria and carefully placed her onto the damaged deck of the MS Stockholm. She woke up under the stars, calling out in Spanish, suffering from a broken arm, but miraculously alive.
Just try to imagine the sheer relief of a father who is reporting on a catastrophic shipwreck only to discover his daughter survived by miraculously sleeping through the collision. Linda's biological father was actually working the news desk in New York, reporting on the very tragedy he believed had claimed his entire family. The very next day, he received the impossible news that his daughter, the soon-to-be-famous Miracle Girl, was safely heading back to New York.
And finally, let's wrap this up with number 5. Expect the unexpected.
Because as we've seen today, history is rarely boring, and the truth will always outright fiction. It really makes you wonder, right? If a shipwreck survivor can teleport and a pope can literally be put on trial after his death, what other impossible truths are just waiting to be uncovered right now? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Stay curious out there, because the impossible might just be happening right outside your window.